They told me to wait in the rain while the real shooters handled it. That was the phrase Specialist Larkin used, and the others laughed like they'd all been waiting for someone to say it out loud. I stood on the edge of the range at Fort Aberdeen, rain soaking through my jacket, and wondered how many times I'd lived this same moment in different weather. My name's Staff Sergeant Lena Morrell, and I've been called a lot of things, some I earned, some I didn't. But the one thing that's always been true is that I shoot better than most people you'll ever meet. The longest confirmed kill in my unit's history, 2 deployments, and enough training hours to make most instructors dizzy. But none of that mattered to the 4 Ranger candidates standing dry under the canopy, looking at me like I'd taken a wrong turn into their world. They saw a woman with a clipboard and a patrol cap. What they didn't see was the rifle case in the truck behind me, the same rifle that had saved lives halfway across the world. I shifted my weight and looked at them through the mist. They were supposed to be evaluated for advanced marksmanship, part of the final gauntlet before heading into Joint Special Operations Command screening. I'd been asked to run their qualification because the regular instructor had been reassigned. Apparently, I wasn't the upgrade they'd expected. The rain fell steady, washing streaks of red Georgia clay, or, in this case, Maryland clay, into thin rivers around my boots. I could smell the wet earth and the faint metallic bite of brass. Somewhere in the distance, a range safety officer was calling cold range over the radio. My own radio, clipped to my belt, crackled quietly with static. The channel was open to the Aberdeen Complex network, though nobody ever really listened. I'd stopped expecting much from people a long time ago. Expectations get you disappointed. Standards, that's what you hold on to. And right now, mine were being tested. "Ma'am," one of them called out. That word always sounded like an insult from the wrong kind of man. "We're supposed to have Sergeant Miles today. You sure you're in the right place?" "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," I said, calm, even. "You 4 are up for evaluation. I'll be running your qual." Larkin, the loud one, exchanged a grin with the tallest, Corporal Haynes. "You hear that? Guess we're getting diversity training today." The others chuckled. One of them, a younger private named Ortiz, didn't laugh. He just looked uneasy, glancing between me and the others like he wasn't sure which side of the line to stand on. I'd seen that look before. The 4th, a sergeant named Crandall, said nothing at all, but his posture said plenty. Arms crossed, chin lifted, ready to challenge everything I said. I checked my watch. They were already 12 minutes behind schedule. "Targets are out," I said. "You'll be firing at 600, 800, and a cold bore at 1,000. You'll have 3 to 5 minutes per iteration to get into position, call your wind, and send rounds." Larkin interrupted before I finished. "Ma'am, with all due respect, we've been shooting long guns since before this course. Maybe just tell us where to sign when we're done." "With all due respect," I said, matching his tone but not his arrogance. "You'll sign when I say you've earned it." That earned me a smirk. Haynes leaned toward Crandall and said, "Bet she read that in the manual." Crandall didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. I could see what kind of dynamic this was. 3 loud ones, and one who hadn't decided if he wanted to be decent yet. I could have pulled rank right then, shut the whole thing down. But I didn't. Not because I wanted to prove anything, because I'd done that already, over and over, but because teaching people like this was part of the job. You can't fix every mindset, but sometimes you can make it think twice. "Here's the plan," I said, keeping my voice measured. "You'll shoot after me. Since you're so confident, I'll set the standard." Larkin snorted. "So you're going to show us how it's done?" "Yes," I said. "Exactly." He blinked, surprised I didn't argue. "All right then," he said, "showtime." They stayed under the canopy while I walked back to the truck. My rifle case was in the back seat, a black Pelican case with 3 travel stickers still on it from deployments I didn't talk about. I wiped the rain off the latches and opened it. The M2010 lay inside, clean and oiled, its surface dull gray under the overcast sky. I could still remember the last time I'd carried it on mission, northern Syria, for years ago, overwatch on a convoy extraction gone sideways. I'd taken a shot through crosswind and sand haze at 1,400 meters. 1 round, 1 life saved. Nobody doubted me then. I assembled the rifle on the tailgate, the routine muscle memory of 100,000 repetitions. Bolt, scope, bipod, suppressor. Everything clicked into place with the quiet certainty of habit. I ran my hand along the barrel, checked torque on the scope mount, and loaded 5 rounds. My fingers felt steady, even as rain traced lines down my gloves. The sound of their laughter carried through the rain. I ignored it. I'd heard worse. You don't make it through this life without building armor where it counts. As I walked back toward the firing line, I caught my reflection in a puddle, patrol cap low, jaw set, eyes sharp. Not angry, just done pretending I hadn't seen this 100 times before. I dropped prone behind the rifle, extended the bipod, and aligned the barrel with the 1,000-meter target, a steel torso barely visible through the drizzle. The wind gusted left to right at about 12 knots. I read it in the movement of the rain, in the ripple of the grass, in the way my breath drifted sideways when I exhaled. The rangefinder read exactly 1,003 meters. The Kestrel in my pocket confirmed temperature, pressure, and humidity. I adjusted my dope accordingly. 2 clicks right for wind, 1 click up for angle. Whenever you're ready, Larkin said behind me, half joking. No pressure. I breathed in, steady. Exhaled halfway. Held. The world narrowed to the reticle and the tiny shimmer of gray in the distance. My finger took up the slack on the trigger, so gradually it almost wasn't movement at all. The shot broke clean. The recoil was smooth, familiar. A heartbeat later, a faint metallic ping echoed back through the rain. Then another, and another. 5 rounds. 5 hits. 90 seconds. When I stood, the laughter was gone. Larkin's jaw was tight. Haynes looked like someone had kicked him in the chest. Crandall stared downrange for a long time before meeting my eyes. Ortiz looked at me differently. Curiosity replacing discomfort. Questions? I asked. Nobody spoke. Good, I said, unloading the rifle. Then we'll proceed with your qual. But before I could finish packing up, the radio on my belt crackled to life. Staff Sergeant Morrell, this is Commander Blake, Naval Special Warfare Group 2. Do you copy? I froze for half a second, recognizing the voice. Then I keyed the mic, copy. This is Morrell. Are you still on the Aberdeen Range Complex? He asked. His tone was clipped, all business. Affirmative, I said. Range 14. Good. I've got a situation 20 miles north at the restricted site. We're running a live interdiction exercise, but my primary sniper's down with a fractured arm. I need someone who can shoot long range, stable under pressure. I've been monitoring the range network. You came recommended. Can you move? I hesitated only long enough to glance at the 4 men watching me, faces unreadable. On my way, I said. Roger that, Blake replied. We'll clear you through the gate. The radio went silent. I clipped it back to my belt and turned to the candidates. Your qual's postponed, I said. Reschedule through the range office. Larkin opened his mouth, but Haynes stopped him. Even he seemed to know this wasn't the time. I packed my rifle, loaded my gear, and climbed into the truck. As I pulled away, I caught sight of them standing in the rain where I'd been minutes before. 4 shapes under a gray sky, finally quiet. The road north was slick and empty. I didn't turn on the radio. Didn't need to. My thoughts were louder than anything that could come through the speakers. Some people earn respect one shot at a time. Others never will. I'd stopped waiting for either. I just did the work. The rain had thinned into mist by the time I left the main roads. The Aberdeen Training Complex faded behind me in the rearview mirror, a blur of mud and camouflage netting. Ahead, pine forest closed in on both sides of the highway, tall, dark silhouettes bending under the low clouds. I'd driven this stretch before, years back during a joint exercise. It always felt lonelier than it looked on a map. The wipers squeaked across the windshield in a slow rhythm. My rifle case sat on the passenger seat, a silent companion I trusted more than most people. I could still feel the tension in my shoulders, the leftover weight of the range confrontation. It wasn't anger, it was habit. Every time I had to prove myself, something inside me tightened, then refused to relax until long after the moment was gone. I thumbed the radio again. Commander Blake, this is Morrell. En route. ETA 40 minutes. Copy that, Staff Sergeant. Range Control's been notified. We'll have an escort at the gate. Appreciate the quick turnaround. His tone hadn't changed since Syria. Professional, focused, the kind of voice that didn't waste oxygen. Back then, we'd worked together during a combined operation outside Al-Hasaka. Different chain of command, same fight. He'd been the kind of officer who noticed competence before anything else. That stuck with me. The asphalt gave way to gravel as the road climbed into the hills north of the base. My headlights cut across the fog, catching the white flash of a deer before it vanished into the trees. I rolled down the window a few inches and let the air in, cold, sharp, clean. It smelled like wet pine and gun oil, and somehow that steadied me. People always assume shooting is about vision, about the eyes. It's not. It's about control. About building quiet inside your own head when everything outside it is chaos. The wind, the math, the breathing. It's all noise unless you can still it. My father taught me that long before the army ever did. He'd been a sheriff's deputy in northern Montana, where winter could kill you faster than a bullet if you didn't know what you were doing. When I was 8, he took me out to a frozen pasture with an old Remington, .243 and a coffee can full of shells. I could barely hold the rifle steady. He didn't say much, just told me to let the world stop breathing before you pull. I missed the first 5 shots, hit on the 6th. The grin he gave me that day lasted exactly 2 seconds, but that was enough. After that, every time life turned into noise, I went looking for that silence again. The gravel road ended at a checkpoint half hidden under camo netting. 2 Navy sentries stepped out of a small booth, rifles slung, faces blurred by the mist. One of them checked my ID and radioed something in. I caught the faint response of Blake's voice on the other end. "She's cleared. Send her through." The barrier lifted, and I rolled forward into a different world. The SEAL training site wasn't on any public map. It sat in a bowl-shaped valley surrounded by hills and dense tree lines. At the center was a mock compound built out of shipping containers and plywood, multi-level, wired for sound and cameras, with a half-dozen vehicles parked in a makeshift motor pool. Floodlights cut across the clearing, throwing long shadows through the rain. I could see figures moving, operators in mixed gear, setting up targets and sensors. Everything about it was quiet and deliberate, the kind of organized chaos that meant something real was about to happen. A man stepped out from under a covered structure near the command tent as I parked. He wore a soaked boonie hat and carried himself like he'd been awake for 3 days. Blake hadn't changed much since Syria. Lean, dark-haired, eyes that never stopped calculating. "Morrell," he said, offering a hand. "Hell of a coincidence you were on the network." "Guess so, sir," I said, shaking his hand. "Heard you've got a hole in your lineup." "Yeah. Our sniper took a bad fall during insertion rehearsal. Compound fracture. He's already at base med. We're running a full-scale interdiction simulation in under 90 minutes. I need someone who can hit at distance and handle command comms without babysitting." "I can do that." He nodded like he'd expected that answer. "Good. Let's brief you." Inside the tent, maps and digital overlays filled a folding table. A portable monitor displayed the compound layout, with colored markers showing entry points and target sectors. It looked like a miniature battlefield, one I'd been in too many times. "Scenario's a live-fire hostage rescue," Blake said, gesturing to the screen. "You'll be Overwatch on Ridge Point Bravo, elevation 224 meters, line of sight on zones 3 through 6. Ranges vary from 450 to about 880 meters. Winds shifting from the southwest, gusting 12 to 15. We've got night optics and IR strobes for friendlies, but you'll be engaging live opposition role players with protective armor. You'll have discretion to fire or hold based on movement and signal calls." He glanced up. "You good with that?" "Absolutely." He studied me for a moment, like he was measuring whether my confidence was real. Then he grinned slightly. "Didn't think I'd ever see you back here." "Didn't plan on it," I said. "But I'm here." He tapped the table. "Then let's make it count." They issued me a radio headset, a weather meter, and an updated range card. I set my rifle case on a folding bench and started assembling it again, methodical, slow, precise. A few of the SEALs passed by and gave me the look, curiosity mixed with skepticism. That was fine. I'd seen worse from friendlies and enemies alike. One of them, a tall operator with a red beard, paused and nodded toward the rifle. "M2010, he asked. "Custom mod," I said without looking up. 338 Lapua. 3/4 MOA at 1,000. He whistled softly. "Respect." That was the first and last word we exchanged. By 1800, the sky had gone from gray to the color of bruised steel. The rain picked up again, light but persistent. We moved out in 2 Humvees, headlights off, tires crunching through the mud. My team, 2 spotters and a radio tech. rode with me up a narrow trail that climbed to the ridge overlooking the valley. When we reached the overwatch position, I stepped out into wind that smelled like ozone and wet bark. The ridge gave a perfect vantage point over the entire compound below. Through my scope, I could see the plywood structures glowing faintly under the floodlights. Targets had been set up in windows, alleys, and rooftops. Some of them were heat-simulating mannequins. Others were actual role players in padded suits. It was as close to real as training got. Comms check. Blake's voice came through the headset. Bravo Overwatch copies, I said. Signal strong. Weather gusting variable, 10 to 15 from 210. Solid copy. Exercise begins in 20. I adjusted my scope, input the environmental data, and aligned my range card. The spotters worked quietly beside me, one handling the laser rangefinder, the other the logbook. We'd done this kind of setup so many times it was practically ritual. The waiting was the hardest part, not because of nerves, but because it gave your thoughts room to wander. I thought about the 4 candidates I'd left on the range that morning. The looks on their faces when the shots hit. The silence afterward. I wondered if they'd talk about it, if any of them would actually think. Probably one would, the quiet one, Ortiz. He reminded me of how I'd been once, before years in uniform taught me that silence was safer than confidence. A cold gust cut through my jacket. I pulled my hood up, settled behind the scope again, and let the world narrow. At 18:30, the radio crackled. All units, exercise start. Confirm positions. Bravo Overwatch in position, I said. Roger. Execution in 3, 2, 1 go. Movement flared below, green strobes blinking through the darkness as the assault element advanced. My scope tracked them automatically, crosshairs hovering just ahead of their path. I saw the first target pop up on the south wall, thermal outline bright in my optic. I breathed in, exhaled, squeezed. Ping. Even from this distance, I could see the mannequin jerk backward, the hit clean through the center plate. My spotter logged the range and wind call. Second target, rooftop, 620 meters. Third, alley, partial cover, 715. Each one dropped. Each one confirmed. The exercise unfolded in synchronized chaos, gunfire echoing faintly through the valley. Time blurred. The world became wind, distance, motion. I fired 11 shots in total. 11 confirmed hits. No misses, no delays. 2 hours gone in what felt like minutes. When the final ceasefire came over the net, I pulled off my headset and sat back. My fingers were stiff from the cold, my breath fogging in front of me. The spotters looked at me like they wanted to say something, but didn't. Blake's voice returned, calm as ever. Excellent work, Staff Sergeant. That's exactly what I needed. Pack up and head back to command when you're ready. Copy that, I said. I broke down the rifle, piece by piece, and stowed it back in the case. The forest around us was quiet except for the wind and the distant hum of generators. For a moment, I just stood there, looking down at the compound. The lights shimmered in puddles like broken stars. It wasn't glory. It wasn't vindication. It was just another job done right. And for me, that was enough. The rain had stopped sometime around dawn. By the time I rolled back into Fort Aberdeen, the clouds had started to break apart, letting thin beams of sunlight spill over the treeling. It made the puddles along the access road shimmer like little mirrors. I'd been awake for 20 hours, maybe more, though fatigue never really hit me until I stopped moving. I parked the government pickup beside the range office, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute. The silence inside the cab felt heavier than it should have. I could still hear the echo of last night's gunfire, the crisp reports snapping through the valley. I'd gone through missions before that lasted longer and carried higher stakes, but something about that one had felt clean, focused, necessary. When I finally stepped out, my boots sank into the damp clay. The air smelled like gunpowder, wet leaves, and diesel from the maintenance lot. Normal morning smells for a place like this. I slung my rifle case over my shoulder and headed toward the office. Sergeant Thompson, the range scheduler, was already there nursing a coffee that looked like tar. He glanced up as I entered. "Morrell," he said, raising an eyebrow. "Heard you pulled an all-nighter." "Something like that," I said. "Got a call from Special Warfare Group. They needed a long gun on short notice." "Yeah, I got the paperwork this morning." He sipped from his mug, then added with a half-smile, "You've apparently got a fan club now." I frowned. "Excuse me." He swiveled his monitor toward me. On the screen was an internal message chain from the candidates I'd evaluated the day before: Larkin, Haynes, Crandall, and Ortiz. They'd submitted a request to reschedule their qualification, but the note underneath caught my attention, requesting Staff Sergeant Morrell as primary evaluator. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for the punchline. "You're kidding." "Nope," Thompson said. "Came in at 0700 sharp." Larkin even filed an apology through his chain. "Haynes too. Crandall sent one separately." He smirked. "Guess you made an impression." I exhaled slowly, somewhere between disbelief and amusement. "That's a first." "Hell," Thompson said. "I've been here 10 years and never seen candidates do that voluntarily." "What did you do? Pull a magic trick?" "Something like that," I said. "Just shot straight." He chuckled. "Well, it worked. You want to run their qual again next week? They specifically requested you." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to let them stew in whatever realization had finally hit them. But another part, the one that believed training mattered more than ego, said yes before I could think it over. "Yeah," I said. "Put me down for it." Thompson nodded and tapped a few keys. "Done. Wednesday morning, range 9. They'll be here at 0800. I gave him a short nod and left. The sunlight was stronger now, turning the puddles gold. I could feel the exhaustion creeping in behind my eyes, but it didn't bother me. It was the kind of tired that came from earning something, even if it was just another lesson taught the hard way. My quarters were on the east side of the compound, a small two-room unit that smelled faintly of cleaning powder and coffee grounds. I set my rifle case in the corner, stripped off my soaked uniform, and stepped into the shower. The water was lukewarm, but it felt like relief. As I stood there, letting the spray run down my face, I caught myself thinking about Commander Blake's voice over the radio, steady, unshaken, the way it had been back in Syria. He'd said something before I left last night, just as I was packing up, something that had stuck. "You ever think about teaching beyond this?" he'd asked. "We could use people like you at the joint schoolhouse, operators who know what competence really looks like." I hadn't known how to answer then. I still didn't. Teaching was what I already did, but the idea of making it permanent, of stepping off the line for good, felt like betrayal somehow. The line was where I came from, where I still belonged, even if it didn't always want me. I turned off the water, wrapped a towel around my shoulders, and looked at myself in the fogged mirror. The face looking back wasn't the one that had joined the army at 19, too many lines around the eyes now, too much weight behind them. But the expression hadn't changed. Still steady, still focused, still mine. After a few hours of restless sleep, I woke to a knock on the door. When I opened it, Ortiz was standing there in civilian clothes, holding a notebook under one arm. His expression was nervous but determined. "Staff Sergeant," he said, straightening unconsciously. "Sorry to bother you. I just wanted to thank you." I blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" "For yesterday," he said, "and for not walking off when we acted like idiots." I leaned against the doorframe. "You didn't say anything wrong, Ortiz. You just didn't stop the others." He nodded, looking down. "Yeah, I know. That's what I wanted to say sorry for." I studied him for a moment. He looked like every decent kid who joined thinking the uniform would make people respect each other automatically. It didn't. It just exposed what was already there. "Apology accepted," I said finally. "You planning to pass your qual next week?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then focus on that. You get one shot to prove you belong. Don't waste it worrying about me." He nodded again, then hesitated. "Sergeant Larkin said he looked you up last night. Found your service record." "Did he now?" "Yeah," Ortiz said. "He didn't say much after that. Just told us we'd screwed up." I didn't smile, but something eased in my chest. "Good," I said. "Let him keep thinking about it." He left a few minutes later, leaving me alone with the quiet again. I sat down at my desk, opened my range logbook, and started making notes for the next session: wind patterns, course layout, time adjustments. Work was a kind of peace I understood. That afternoon, I stopped by the motor pool to return the truck. The sun was fully out now, turning the wet gravel into a shimmer of heat. As I signed the return sheet, my radio crackled again. "This is Commander Blake. Staff Sergeant Morrell, you on frequency?" I keyed the mic. "Copy. Go ahead." "Just wanted to say thanks again for last night," he said. The AR came back clean. The training evaluators called it one of the best Overwatch runs we've had in years. "Glad to hear it, sir," I said. "Also," he added, "I wasn't joking about that offer. We're expanding the Advanced Sniper Instructor Program next quarter. It's Joint Command, Army, Navy, Air Force. You'd be teaching operators, not recruits. Think about it. I will, I said, though I wasn't sure I meant it. Good, he said. You've earned the right to choose what comes next. Not everyone does. The radio clicked silent. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of engines filling the space around me. The idea of leaving the regiment felt like stepping off a cliff. But there was something else too, an itch I hadn't felt in years. The thought that maybe teaching wasn't a step down, but another kind of battlefield. I didn't make any promises. I just got back in the truck, turned on the ignition, and drove toward the range again. Sometimes the only way to think is to keep moving. The next few days passed in a rhythm I knew by heart. Maintenance, training, paperwork, sleep, repeat. By Tuesday night, the range was ready again. Targets repaired, sensors recalibrated, and the course remarked with fresh paint. I ran my own test shots at 600 and 800 meters to confirm the data. Both strings printed tight groups. The air was still cool, the wind mild. Perfect shooting weather. I didn't expect the candidates to show up early, but they did. When I arrived Wednesday morning, all four were already there. Uniforms pressed, weapons laid out neatly. No laughter, no smugness. Just focus. Morning, I said, setting my rifle case down. Morning, Staff Sergeant, Larkin replied, his tone even. We appreciate you giving us another shot. I studied him for a second. The arrogance was gone. What replaced it looked like respect, or maybe humility. Either way, it was better. All right, I said. You know the course. Same distances. Same time limits. Let's see what you've learned. They nodded. The rain clouds had cleared, but the ground was still damp. Mist curled off the trees as they moved into position. I watched them through the spotting scope as each one settled behind the rifle. Larkin went first. His breathing was steady, his adjustments careful. When the first shot rang out, the steel at 600 meters pinged clean. He exhaled, adjusted, fired again. Another hit. By the end of the round, he'd gone 5 for 5. Crandall followed. Then Haynes. Then Ortiz. None of them were perfect, but all of them were solid. Focused. Professional. I'd seen squads of seasoned operators shoot worse. When they finished, I called them in. All four of you passed, I said simply. Larkin nodded. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. For real. Don't thank me, I said. You earned it. Just remember what got you here. Discipline, not pride. Yes, ma'am. They gathered their gear quietly. Ortiz lingered a moment longer. You ever think about writing this stuff down? He asked suddenly. Like what it takes to do what you do. I shook my head. No point writing it down, I said. People only believe what they see. He smiled faintly. We believe it now. As they left, I looked out over the range, sunlight gleaming off the steel, wind moving through the grass. For the first time in a long while, I felt something close to peace. Not satisfaction exactly, but clarity. Proof that all the years, all the repetition, all the quiet endurance still meant something. Later that day, I found myself walking back to the office with a new thought I couldn't quite shake. Maybe Blake was right. Maybe the next chapter wasn't about proving I could still shoot better than anyone else. Maybe it was about making sure someone else could too. But that was tomorrow's decision. Today, I'd done my job. And that was enough. Commander Blake's words echoed in my head for days. You've earned the right to choose what comes next. I didn't know what that meant anymore. The regiment had been my life since I was 19. Every sunrise, every deployment, every round fired downrange had shaped who I was. The idea of teaching, really teaching, not just evaluating, felt like stepping into a world where my trigger finger didn't matter. But the seed had been planted. That Friday, I was back at the range, running standard drills with a new batch of recruits. Their shots scattered across the steel like a shotgun blast. They were kids, barely out of high school, still trying to figure out which end of a rifle had authority. Reset, I called out. Slow as smooth. Smooth as fast. They obeyed, though their movements were clumsy. Watching them, I realized something. When I corrected their grip or adjusted their posture, the improvement was instant. They weren't lazy. They just hadn't had someone expect more from them before. It hit me harder than I expected. That night, I sat in my quarters cleaning my rifle. The metallic smell of solvent filled the room, the familiar rhythm of patches and oil pulling me back to a simpler time. I caught myself staring at the weapon longer than usual. It had been my voice in a world that didn't always listen. But maybe it was time to start speaking differently. Part 5. The letter. 3 days later, a sealed envelope arrived through internal mail. The header read, Joint Special Operations Command, Instructor Selection Board. Inside was a formal invitation to interview for an instructor position at the Advanced Sniper Course in North Carolina. Commander Blake's name was listed as one of the recommending officers. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long while. Leaving meant walking away from the regiment's tempo, from the adrenaline, from the noise that had defined me. But staying meant more of the same endless cycle. Prove, outperform, repeat. Maybe it was time to stop fighting the same battle. That evening, I took my truck out to the long-distance range. The sun was setting, burning the sky orange and red. I set up my rifle and fired one clean string at 1,000 meters. Every round hit dead center. Then I packed up, locked the rifle case, and whispered, All right, Blake, let's see what comes next. The JSOC compound in North Carolina didn't look like much from the outside. Just another cluster of low-tin buildings surrounded by pine forest and chain-link fencing. Inside, though, it felt like walking into the nerve center of the special operations world. Everything hummed with quiet purpose. People moved like they'd already done 3 missions before breakfast. My interview was scheduled for 1,300 hours. I arrived 15 minutes early, just like always. The receptionist at the front desk barely glanced up as I signed in and handed over my ID. She pointed me toward a conference room with frosted glass walls and a faint smell of coffee that had been burning on the warmer too long. There were 4 officers seated at the table when I entered, 3 men and 1 woman. The woman, a Marine major with sharp eyes, introduced herself as Major Sloan, the board chair. Commander Blake sat 2 seats down, expression neutral. The other 2 wore Army and Air Force patches. It was Joint Command, all right. Staff Sergeant Morrell. Sloan began, motioning for me to sit. You come highly recommended. We've reviewed your file, multiple deployments, confirmed kills, instructor evaluations, commendations. Impressive record. Thank you, ma'am. She glanced at her notes. Tell us, why do you want this position? The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't expected it, but because I didn't have a rehearsed answer. I took a breath. I've spent my career proving I could do the job, I said. But the job doesn't end when you stop pulling the trigger. It ends when the next generation doesn't need to question who deserves to be here. I want to make sure that happens. Blake gave the smallest nod, but the Air Force officer across from me, Colonel Maddox, leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. And you think you can do that better in a classroom than on a rifle? He asked. I met his gaze. Yes, sir. Because skill fades if you don't pass it on. The room went quiet for a moment. Sloan broke it with a thin smile. That's a fair answer, Staff Sergeant. Let's move on. They questioned me for nearly an hour. Scenarios, command ethics, instructional methodology. It felt more like interrogation than interview, but I held my ground. When it ended, Blake caught up with me outside. You did fine, he said. Fine? I asked. He smiled faintly. Better than most. Don't worry, they'll come around. As he walked off, I realized something strange. I didn't feel nervous anymore. Whatever happened next, I'd already decided who I was. 2 weeks later, the call came through while I was running a dawn drill at Aberdeen. My radio crackled with a frequency I didn't recognize. This is Major Sloan, JSOC Training Command. Is this Staff Sergeant Morrell? Affirmative. Congratulations. You've been selected for the instructor program. Report to Fort Bragg in 30 days. I froze, hand still on the rifle's bolt. Around me, the recruits were firing at the 400-meter line, oblivious. The echo of their rounds blurred into the hum of the morning wind. Copy that, ma'am, I said finally. When the line went dead, I just stood there a moment, watching the smoke rise off the steel targets. It hit me all at once. This was real. A new chapter. A new battlefield. That night, I packed my gear slowly. Every patch, every folded uniform carried years of noise, memory, and grit. Leaving felt heavy, but for the first time, the weight didn't hurt. Fort Bragg greeted me with humid air that clung to the skin and the constant sound of rotor blades somewhere in the distance. The Joint Advanced Marksmanship Course occupied a small training compound on the west side of the base, half classroom, half range, all discipline. The first day wasn't about teaching. It was about surviving introductions. There were 12 students in my class, 6 Rangers, 3 SEALs, 2 Air Force pararescue specialists, and 1 Marine recon. Every one of them carried the same quiet confidence that came from being the best at what they did. And every one of them did a double take when they realized their lead instructor was a woman. I could feel the silence settle when I walked in. "Morning," I said, setting my range log on the desk. "I'm Staff Sergeant Lena Morrell. For the next 6 weeks, I'll be your primary instructor for long-range interdiction and field evaluation. You'll call me ma'am or instructor, whichever keeps you from sounding dumb." A few grins, mostly stares. "Before we start," I added, "I don't care where you came from, who you deployed with, or how many tattoos your team earned. Out here, hits matter. Everything else is noise." That got a laugh from the Marine recon in the back. It broke the ice, just barely. The first week was about fundamentals, wind calls, slope equations, ballistic data. Most of them thought they already knew it all. They didn't. By day 3, the arrogance had worn off. The range at Bragg stretched out past 1,000 meters, with crosswinds that shifted like ocean currents. When their shots started drifting wide, they began to listen. That Friday, after another round of cold bore misses, I gathered them near the firing line. "Your rifle doesn't care how tough you are," I said. "It only cares how honest you are with the math." They laughed again, but they were learning. That night, I stayed late cleaning rifles in the armory. The concrete floor was cool beneath my boots, and the metallic smell of oil and carbon clung to everything. Commander Blake stopped by on his way out. "Settling in?" he asked. I nodded. "They're good. Stubborn, but good." He smiled. "They'll respect you soon enough." "I'm not here for respect," I said. "Just results." He gave a small nod, the kind that said he understood exactly what I meant, and left me to the quiet hum of the armory lights. I looked down at the line of rifles gleaming under the fluorescence and realized that, for the first time in a long while, I wasn't proving anything. I was building something, and that felt different. The first full-scale exercise came in week 3. We'd been prepping for days, range cards, firing positions, target grids, but nothing in the classroom ever survives first contact with weather. That morning the sky hung low and gray, a mist crawling over the hills outside Fort Bragg's range complex. The air was thick enough to taste. Perfect conditions for humility. I stood beside the Humvee as the class checked their gear. Most of them were quiet now, respectful, focused. Only Sergeant Keener, one of the SEALs, still carried a chip on his shoulder. He was good, no doubt, but good shooters sometimes make the worst students. They think precision means they've got nothing left to learn. "Targets from 600 to 900 meters, I said, holding up the course sheet. "You'll get 3 minutes to range, calculate, and fire. Winds variable at 10 to 14 knots from your 2 o'clock. If you miss, call your correction and send again. Real-world timing, real-world pressure." Keener smirked. "Copy that, ma'am. Try to keep up." The other students gave him side eyes. I didn't respond. The range would answer for me. The first few shooters did well, steady hits, good adjustments. Then Keener took his turn. He fired fast, too fast. His first round missed wide right by 2 feet. Second one went high. His spotter called corrections, but Keener ignored him and squeezed off a third shot before the data was set. Miss again. I knelt beside him, voice calm. "You're chasing the bullet, not the wind. Breathe. Read the flags. Wait for the lull." He gave a tight nod and reloaded. Fourth shot, still off. Fifth, barely clipped the target stand. "Cease fire," I said. "Step back." He looked up, irritated. "Ma'am, I've got it." "No," I said. "You had 5 chances. Now you watch." I dropped behind his rifle. My spotter handed me the data sheet. I read the mirage, adjusted 2 clicks left, half a click down. Exhaled. The world went silent. Ping. Center hit. Again, my spotter said. Second shot. Ping. Same spot. The class fell quiet except for the echo rolling off the trees. I stood, cleared the weapon, and handed it back. "That's how you keep up, Sergeant." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, jaw tight. That night, after we packed up, Keener came to find me at the truck. "Ma'am," he said, staring at the ground. "I was out of line earlier. Won't happen again." I nodded. "Good. That's how you get better." He hesitated. "How'd you see the wind change that fast?" "Experience," I said, "and a little patience." He smiled faintly. "Guess I'll start working on that." "Do," I said, climbing into the cab. It's worth it. As I drove back through the base roads, headlights cutting through the mist, I realized I wasn't just teaching them to shoot. I was teaching them what every good marksman eventually learns. Control has nothing to do with power. It's about trust and timing and knowing when to wait. Graduation day came 2 weeks later. The air was clear, the range dry, and the sun had finally burned through the haze that had hung over Fort Bragg all month. 12 students stood in a loose line at the firing berm, faces sunburned and uniforms dusty, every one of them waiting for the final command. We were down to the last test, a single cold-bore shot at 900 meters. No warm-ups, no corrections. One pull, hit or miss. They took turns in silence. Each report cracked through the still air, followed by the metallic echo of impact. 11 hits. One clean miss that drew a groan from the shooter and quiet applause from the rest. When it was over, I walked down the line. You all just proved you can do more than shoot straight, I said. You proved you can stay calm when the wind lies to you, when the data's wrong, when the world doesn't cooperate. That's what separates marksmen from shooters. Remember that. Keener grinned. You ever miss, ma'am? Only when I forget who I am, I said, and the class laughed. That night, after the paperwork was signed and the students had gone off to their next assignments, I stayed on the range alone. The air was warm, filled with the steady drone of cicadas. I set my rifle up one last time, not to prove anything, not for score, just to listen. Through the scope, the target shimmered at 1,000 meters, a faint blur against the twilight. I adjusted wind, exhaled, and squeezed. Ping. The sound drifted back a second later, soft and perfect. I smiled, unloaded, and sat back. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to be anywhere else. The following morning, I found a note waiting in my mailbox, handwritten, not official. Lena, we're opening a permanent training detachment at Aberdeen next quarter. I'd like you to lead it. You'll shape the curriculum, build your own team, and train the next generation from the ground up. Think about it. Blake. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into my logbook. For once, the decision felt easy. I left the classroom at dusk, walking toward the empty range. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of cut grass and cordite. Somewhere far off, I heard another class firing, the faint rhythm of rounds meeting steel. Every shot told the same story: patience, precision, belief. I thought about the ranch in Montana, about my father's voice telling me to let the world stop breathing before you pull. I thought about the 4 candidates back at Aberdeen, about the men at Bragg who'd finally learned to listen. And I realized that maybe this was all I'd ever wanted, to stand at the edge of the noise and teach someone else how to find the quiet. I packed up my gear, slung the rifle case over my shoulder, and turned toward the lights of the compound. The night air was cool against my face. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was proving anything. I was exactly where I belonged. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.